Echoes call from hollow halls, a voice that creeps and softly crawls. Time stands still, the air is...
On July 6, 2016, 32-year-old Philando Castile was driving with his girlfriend and her young daughter when police pulled them over in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. It was supposed to be a simple traffic stop for a broken taillight, but within minutes, the encounter turned fatal. The dashcam, the police body camera, and the live-streamed video that followed captured every second. And as shocking as it was, this was only one of many. These are 6 of the most disturbing videos that terrified the world and even left the FBI shaken. On the 20th of June, 2009, the streets of Tehran were thick with tension. Protests had erupted after Iran's disputed presidential election, and thousands of people filled the avenues, chanting for reform. Among them was a 27-year-old woman named Neda Agha-Soltan, a philosophy student who loved fashion, music, and travel. She had grown frustrated with the country's rigid political and religious climate and wanted to see change. That afternoon, she set out with her music teacher, Hamid Panahi, to join the demonstrations. As they drove through the city in her small Peugeot 26, the summer heat became unbearable. The car's air conditioning barely worked, so Neda parked a short distance away from the main protests on Kargar Avenue. She stepped out, hoping to watch from the side. People around her were restless but determined. Some shouted slogans. Others recorded the chaos on their phones. Then, without warning, a single gunshot cracked through the air. Within seconds, Neda collapsed. Those nearby rushed toward her. The video that would later shock the world began recording just moments after she fell. Her white blouse quickly stained red. A man's voice could be heard yelling, "She's been shot. Someone help her." The camera shook as people gathered, desperately trying to save her. A doctor in the crowd, Arash Hijazi, pressed his hands against her chest, trying to stop the bleeding. But the damage was catastrophic. The bullet had pierced her heart, and within 2 minutes, she was gone. Her friend Panahi would later recall her last words, a haunting whisper, "I'm burning, I'm burning." The man who fired the shot, witnesses said, was a member of Iran's Basij militia, a paramilitary group loyal to the government. Hidden on a rooftop overlooking the street, he had aimed directly at her. Protesters caught sight of the shooter as he tried to escape. They tackled him, shouting, "We got him, we got him." When they pulled his identification, it confirmed what many already suspected. He was one of the regime's enforcers. The man cried out that he hadn't meant to kill her. The protesters let him go, but kept his ID card and took photographs as evidence. That brief video clip, just a few seconds long, would travel across the world within hours. Uploaded online and broadcast by global news outlets, it showed Neda's final moments as she lay dying on the pavement. The footage tore through censorship barriers and became one of the most powerful symbols of Iran's Green Movement. For many watching from their homes, she wasn't just a victim, she was the face of resistance. Yet behind the viral image was a young woman whose life had barely begun. Before the protests, Neda had been studying philosophy at Islamic Azad University. Friends said she was curious about the world, loved music, and dreamed of seeing Europe. She was divorced, independent, and quietly rebellious, the kind of person who refused to let politics dictate how she lived. She took music lessons, wore colorful scarves, and read about human rights. To her family, she was simply kind-hearted and full of life. In the days that followed her death, Iran's government scrambled to control the narrative. Officials first denied that she had died at all, then they claimed the video was fake. Next, they accused foreign media of staging the event, saying the BBC, the CIA, or opposition groups had fabricated it to discredit them. Each version contradicted the last, but the footage was undeniable. It had been recorded by bystanders on their phones, shared instantly, and mirrored across countless platforms before censors could remove it. While authorities tried to bury the truth, journalists and activists worked to uncover who Neda really was. Iranian reporter Saeed Degan risked his freedom to investigate her story for the documentary For Neda. In the film, he visited her home, met her mother, and pieced together her life from those who knew her best. He showed her as more than a symbol, as a woman with dreams, humor, and warmth, someone who simply wanted a voice in her country's future. The documentary revealed that Neda had no connection to political groups. She wasn't an activist or leader. She was an ordinary citizen who got caught in a movement much larger than herself. Her death, however, became a rallying cry. Protesters across Tehran carried her photo, chanting her name. Artists painted murals in her honor. Musicians wrote songs inspired by her courage. Even as authorities tightened control and arrested thousands, including journalists and students, her image continued to circulate, a reminder of what the struggle for freedom had cost. Amnesty International later estimated that around 5,000 people were arrested in the wake of the election unrest. Many were tortured, and some disappeared entirely. By the following year, fear had settled over the city. The government's brutal crackdowns had silenced many reform voices. Demonstrations that had once filled entire streets now drew only small crowds. People were scared to be seen, to speak, to post anything online. But Neda's memory lived on in whispers and in the footage that no one could erase. Her story was not just about one protest or one tragedy. It exposed the deep fractures in Iran's political system and the price of dissent. Even after her death, the government's attempts to rewrite history only strengthened her legacy. Every denial, every propaganda broadcast reminded the world of the regime's fear. Fear of a single image, a few seconds of truth, and one woman's final breath captured forever on camera. By the time international news outlets broadcast her story, Neda Agha-Soltan had already become a global symbol of defiance. Her name was spoken at rallies in Paris, London, and New York. World leaders condemned the Iranian government's violence, and activists compared her to other figures who had become icons of resistance through tragedy. But for those who knew her personally, she wasn't a political figure. She was simply Neda, a daughter, a student, a friend who loved poetry and laughter. Her family, devastated by her loss, said all they wanted was justice and truth. None came. No one was officially charged for her killing. The man identified by the crowd vanished into the system, and the government refused to acknowledge his role. Still, that footage remained. The shaky video of her collapse, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to forget, became proof of what the regime had done. It was a rare moment when technology defeated censorship. A camera phone held by an ordinary person captured a crime and shared it with the entire world. Today, years later, Neda's name still echoes whenever people talk about courage and sacrifice. Her death didn't bring immediate change to Iran, but it awakened something powerful. The understanding that even under the harshest repression, a single act of truth can break through. And though her voice was silenced, her image continues to speak louder than ever. Before we go any further, I just want to ask you for a small favor. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We recently hit 100,000 subscribers, and that's all thanks to you. Our 100K special surprise was revealed, and we had many positive responses from you. Our next goal is to hit 200K before the year ends. It feels impossible, but hey, it's free to dream, right? Also, there's a hidden word somewhere in this video for you. Let's see if you can find it. Now, back to the video. It was a quiet Monday evening in Sacramento when the unthinkable happened. Drivers along Highway 50 suddenly looked up to see a medical helicopter descending far too quickly from the sky. Dashcam footage later showed the aircraft tilting at a sharp angle, then spiraling downward before smashing into an embankment and rolling across the highway. Smoke began to pour from the wreckage. Within seconds, cars screeched to a stop. Dozens of bystanders jumped out and sprinted toward the flaming chopper, desperate to help. The crash occurred just after 7 o'clock in the evening, less than a minute after the pilot had lifted off from the UC Davis Medical Center. According to flight logs, the helicopter, a Reach Air Medical Services H-130, had left Red Bluff Municipal Airport at 5:50 in the evening, completed its trip to UC Davis without issue, and was making its return flight when something went terribly wrong. As the helicopter descended, it narrowly missed homes along the highway before colliding with the asphalt. Witnesses recalled the terrifying moment when the sky lit up with a burst of smoke and flame. One of the first to arrive at the scene was driver Kenneth DeCrescenzo, who saw the aircraft streaking dangerously low above the treetops. "It was skimming along just above the freeway," he said. "Then, all of a sudden, there was a fireball right in front of us." When his car came to a stop, DeCrescenzo's instincts took over. Without hesitation, he told his passengers to call for help and ran toward the wreckage. "I just said go out there and see if you can help," he explained later. "I was scared it might blow up, but it felt like the right thing to do." Another witness, Elvin Norman, joined him, along with more than a dozen others who had pulled over. They could hear cries for help. One of the crew members was trapped beneath the helicopter's frame. Working together, the group grabbed parts of the tail section and lifted with all their strength while firefighters and paramedics rushed in. "We didn't know if it was going to explode," Norman said, "but that made it even more important to get them out fast." The rescue was captured on camera by DeCrescenzo's wife, Terry, who stood nearby filming the scene. Her video showed the group of strangers straining to raise the helicopter enough for first responders to pull the injured crew free. "It was just people helping people," she said. "No one thought twice about it. Everyone just ran toward the danger." Authorities confirmed that there were 3 people on board: a pilot, a nurse, and a paramedic. All 3 were rushed to UC Davis Medical Center in critical condition, but were later reported by NBC News to be expected to survive. Miraculously, no one on the ground was injured. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, which had been on a routine patrol flight nearby, witnessed the crash from the air. They later credited the pilot's quick thinking for preventing an even greater tragedy. He managed to clear the homes and bring the helicopter down on Highway 50 without hitting any civilians, one officer explained. "That's a remarkable bit of flying under impossible circumstances." From above, aerial footage taken by Livecopter 3 showed how close the crash site was to the hospital's helipad, only a short distance away. Investigators from the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board quickly arrived to determine what went wrong in those final seconds. Veteran pilot Dan Oppenheim, who flies for Livecopter 3, explained that medical pilots are trained constantly for emergencies like this. Forced landings and emergency procedures are practiced routinely. He said, "One of the most common is called an autorotation, a kind of power-off landing. We don't know if that's what happened here, but if there was a power loss, a pilot has very limited options when they're flying that low." Oppenheim added that he typically flies about 1,000 feet above the ground to allow room for maneuvering in case of engine failure. "At low altitude," he said, "you don't have much time or space to react." Even though the cause remains under investigation, the pilot's actions almost certainly saved lives. He guided the aircraft away from crowded areas and avoided cars speeding along the freeway, a move that many aviation experts have described as heroic. Reporter Andrea Flores from KCRA3 examined records from the FAA and NTSB, uncovering that there have been 2 other incidents involving Reach Air Medical Services helicopters in recent years. In November of 2015, one helicopter's tail rotor was struck by a towel that had been sucked in during a firefighting training exercise in Apple Valley. Thankfully, no one was injured. Then, in December of 2022, another Reach helicopter encountered a flock of birds at 1,500 feet during a nighttime flight. The pilot suffered a leg injury from flying debris, but managed to land safely in a nearby field. Those past events serve as reminders of the dangers medical pilots face daily, operating at low altitude, in unpredictable weather and under extreme pressure to reach patients in time. Monday's crash along Highway 50 was a terrifying example of how quickly things can go wrong, but also how fast people can come together. The video of strangers risking their lives to lift burning wreckage has been shared widely online, hailed as a testament to courage and human instinct. In an age where many simply record tragedies from a distance, these bystanders acted without hesitation. As one rescuer said afterward, "Maybe what I did was small, but if it helped move that helicopter even an inch, maybe that was the difference between the morgue and the hospital." As of the latest reports, all 3 crew members remain in recovery, and investigators continue to piece together what caused the helicopter to lose control. The charred remains have been removed from the freeway. Traffic has resumed, but the memory of that night, the flashing lights, the smoke, and the sight of ordinary people doing the extraordinary, will linger for a long time. I stumbled on something that has lived online for years. A strange home video people now call grave robbing for morons. It is not the kind of clip you forget. A young man sits with a skull and talks in a calm, shaky way about how people take bones from graves and try to sell them. His stutter makes the whole thing feel even more uneasy. He gives blunt tips, then contradicts himself, then drifts into bragging. He says it is only his 2nd time. He names friends, signs off with the name Anthony, and even mentions a plan to target the grave of Harry Houdini in Queens. Whether that was bravado or a real idea, it shows the mix of immaturity and misplaced confidence that flows through the tape. Across the internet, Most viewers think the bones in the video look real. People point out dental work, discoloration, and details that are hard to fake in an era before easy digital effects. The tape almost certainly came after 1987, because an Evil Dead 2 cassette is visible, and a film magazine on the table places it no earlier than 1989. The accent sounds like the American East Coast. The Houdini reference makes Queens, New York a reasonable guess. Some advice the speaker gives, like using diluted bleach or leaving bones in the sun to brighten them, matches real-world preparation methods used for medical specimens. Although experts often warn against harsh cleaning, the clip became a kind of urban legend because the origins are missing. Bootleggers copied tapes, sellers bundled it into underground compilations, and the digital upload years later only widened the circle. When stories circulate without firm facts, rumors rush in. People have tried to match Anthony to real names, jobs, or arrests. Every time a lead appears solid, it falls apart under scrutiny. The simplest truth is the one no one likes to accept. We do not know who filmed it, where it was filmed, or what happened to the people involved. The bigger context matters. There is a long, uncomfortable history around human remains and the ways they have been treated. For centuries, medical training needed bodies for anatomy. Legal supply lagged behind demand. That gap created bad incentives. In 1976, India tried to restrict exports of remains, then loosened rules 2 years later with paperwork that could be abused. In the mid-1980s, reporting exposed trafficking of rare specimens, including children, which led to a permanent ban. Bans did not end the market. They pushed it into darker corners. In the 2000s and the 2010s, online marketplaces and private groups made trading easier. Sites experimented with bans and exceptions. Sellers moved to invite-only communities. Investigators found everything from teaching specimens to items shaped from human tissue. The law in the United States is a patchwork. Federal rules prohibit some things, permit others, and defer much to the states. There are strong protections for Native American remains, but many other categories fall into areas where enforcement depends on proof of origin, which is often missing. That missing provenance is the heart of the ethical problem. Even when a sale looks legal on paper, families may not have consented to the final use. Donations intended for science can be diverted by intermediaries, turned into displays, or disassembled and sold as parts. There have been cases where loved ones believed a body would support disease research, only to discover it was used in demonstrations or destructive testing. At the same time, reports have shown networks that stole from institutions and funneled material to private buyers. When a label says retired medical specimen, that sounds respectable. Without transparent records, it can hide a painful story. This is why the tape unsettles people. It is not just what the young man is doing on camera. It is the feeling that a person, once loved, has been turned into something else, stripped of name and history, and discussed as stock. The speaker treats the skull like a prop. He gives tips about bringing friends, choosing quiet places, and keeping a low profile. He jokes, then gets serious, then jokes again. That casual tone is the most chilling part. It makes the loss feel ordinary. There are reasons to be cautious. A filmmaker magazine sits in the background. Some lines sound like a teenager trying to shock friends. The talk about famous graves leans into fantasy. The contradictions could be the product of nerves or showmanship, but even if parts of it are exaggeration, the broader world that surrounds the tape is real. There have been arrests tied to theft from morgues and schools. There have been guilty pleas that describe how items moved from legitimate spaces to private hands. When people first hear about all of this, they often ask a practical question: how can the public respond? The answer is simple, but not easy. Value transparency. Ask hard questions about provenance when you see human material offered for sale. Support institutions that treat remains with dignity. Understand the difference between lawful donation with clear consent and opportunistic resale by middlemen. Remember that science and education can be served with care and respect, but they can also be used as cover for exploitation. The internet loves a mystery, and this tape fits every box. Shot on an old camcorder, passed from hand to hand, filled with clues that might mean something or nothing at all. For many, it is the holy grail of found footage, because it keeps its secret. The young man names himself Anthony, then stops at the last second, smiles, and says, "Never mind." That is the paradox. We have a skull in the center of the frame, and we know almost nothing about the person it once was. We have a name on a tongue, and we never hear the rest. On a quiet evening broadcast, the anchor's tone was heavy, deliberate. He warned viewers that the story ahead was deeply disturbing, the kind that pierced beyond politics or headlines. Then the news broke. An American civilian, 26-year-old Nick Berg, had been kidnapped and executed in Iraq. The report said he had been taken before a camera, and what followed was too horrific to show on television. His captors, 5 masked men who claimed allegiance to Al-Qaeda, called the act revenge for the abuse of Iraqi prisoners at Abu Ghraib. Nick Berg had gone to Iraq with good intentions. He wanted to help repair communications equipment and play a small part in rebuilding a country torn apart by war. But things didn't go as planned. Work was scarce. He had been trying to find a way home when he disappeared in early April, just as reports surfaced of other Americans being ambushed near Baghdad. For weeks his family heard nothing. Then came the tape. The video appeared online, labeled with the name Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, one of Osama bin Laden's closest lieutenants and a figure already infamous for orchestrating violence in Iraq. The men in the footage stood over Berg, reciting messages to American soldiers and their families. They claimed they had offered to trade him for detainees held at Abu Ghraib, though no one could verify that such an exchange was ever requested. Then, in a scene too awful for broadcast, they ended his life and raised his head to the camera. Reporters later said Berg's body was found on a Saturday in May 2004, dumped near a highway overpass in Baghdad. The cause of death was clear. The circumstances leading to his capture were not. Some believed he had been detained by Iraqi police or by coalition forces before vanishing. Others thought he had fallen into extremist hands while traveling alone. What was certain was that his murderers wanted the world to see it, to use it as propaganda in a war of fear and retaliation. The message accompanying the video promised that more hostages would be killed in the same way. It was meant to terrify, to send a warning that every act of American aggression would be repaid in blood. The words "revenge for Abu Ghraib" echoed across networks, connecting the brutal execution to the images of prisoner abuse that had just come to light. Images that had already shaken the United States and angered much of the world. Nick Berg's parents, Michael and Suzanne, later spoke publicly, their grief impossible to hide. They said their son wasn't in Iraq for money or recognition. He wanted to help, to use his technical skills to fix things, to be part of rebuilding. His father described him as selfless, someone who believed in doing what was right even when it wasn't safe. Their statements cut through the political noise, reminding viewers that behind every headline, there was a family shattered by loss. The government identified al-Zarqawi as the man behind the killing, a shadowy figure who had long been on the coalition's most wanted list. He was said to have a $10 million bounty on his head. Intelligence officials described him as the architect of terror operations across Iraq, linking him to bombings, kidnappings, and assassinations. For him, the killing of Nick Berg was not just a murder, it was theater, a message delivered through horror. The video spread quickly across extremist websites, shared and downloaded before authorities could take it down. It became one of the earliest examples of how terror groups would use the internet as a weapon, broadcasting violence to provoke outrage and fear. For many who saw parts of it, the shock was unlike anything they had experienced before. Even seasoned reporters struggled to describe it. When CBS aired the story that night, they refused to show the most graphic parts. The anchor explained that some images were too painful, too inhumane to display. Yet even without them, the gravity of what had happened came through. The camera cut between statements from military officials, footage from Baghdad, and quiet interviews with those who knew Berg. The nation, already weary from reports of conflict and prisoner abuse, was forced to confront another level of brutality. In Washington, lawmakers demanded answers about how such a tragedy could occur, how an American civilian working independently in Iraq could fall so easily into the hands of militants. The military said little, citing security concerns. Intelligence experts said it was a sign of how fragmented the situation in Iraq had become, with different militant factions competing for attention through acts of violence designed to shock. The next day, newspapers around the world carried the story. The details were sparse, but the reaction was immediate. Condemnation, grief, and a growing realization that the war had entered a darker phase. Terror was no longer confined to bombings or battlefields. It had become personal, filmed, and distributed for the world to see. For Nick Berg's family, no explanation could fill the silence he left behind. His mother remembered him as a boy who loved tinkering with machines, always curious about how things worked. His father said he had a deep sense of duty to help others, even when the risks were clear. In the months that followed, his name became a symbol of the civilians caught between forces far beyond their control. By the end of that night's broadcast, the story had already become part of history. One more reminder of how fragile hope can be in a place consumed by war. It was not just about politics or military operations. It was about one young man who went to rebuild, and the cruelty that ended his life before he could return home. 58-year-old Lonnie David Franklin sat in a Los Angeles jail cell, accused of crimes so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled to speak about them without pause. Known to the public as the Grim Sleeper, Franklin had already been charged with killing 10 women and girls, murders stretching back to the 1980s. But now detectives feared the true number of victims could be much higher. On a Tuesday morning, Los Angeles police once again appealed to the public for help. During a press conference, Detective Dennis Kilcoyne revealed that investigators were now looking into the possibility that Franklin had claimed at least 8 additional victims. Since his arrest the previous year, officers had been painstakingly reviewing hundreds of photographs and pieces of evidence taken from his home. Many of these pictures showed women who were never identified, their faces frozen in time, their fates unknown. Detective Kilcoyne stood before the cameras, his tone grave. "We still have 55 faces here that we don't know the answers to," he said. "And where that leads us tomorrow, I don't know." His words painted a chilling picture, one of uncertainty, fear, and desperation for truth. Among the images found inside Franklin's home, 3 photographs immediately caught the investigators' attention. The first was of 18-year-old Ayala Marshall, who vanished in February of 2005. The second showed 29-year-old Rolenia Morris, last seen in September of that same year. The third was a woman whose identity remains a mystery. What made these 3 women so important was where their photos were discovered. Inside Franklin's refrigerator, beside a picture of another woman he had already been charged with killing. Detectives believed the placement of these photos was no coincidence. "The reason those 3 are of the utmost importance to us," Kilcoyne explained, "is the location at Mr. Franklin's residence where these items were recovered. They were separate and apart from the majority of the photos we've been working on." It was as if Franklin had given these particular women a different kind of attention, one that investigators feared might indicate something much darker. When Franklin was arrested, the discovery of those photographs sent shockwaves through Los Angeles. Police uncovered over 160 pictures of women, some smiling, some posing, and others caught in candid, unguarded moments. They were found not only in his house, but also in his garage and vehicles. Some were developed prints, others were undeveloped film, and a few were still frames from video recordings. It was a chilling archive of faces and lives, most of them women of color. Their ages ranged from teenage years to women in their 60s. The police decided to take an extraordinary step. They released 180 of the photographs to the public, posting them online in hopes that someone might recognize a face. Some of the photos showed the same woman in different poses. Most had been cropped so that only the head and shoulders were visible, as many of the women had been partly or fully undressed when the pictures were taken. The decision to publish them did not come easily. Detectives worried about embarrassing women who might still be alive, but they knew that identifying them could help uncover long-buried truths. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the release, the Los Angeles Police Department was flooded with calls, hundreds of them. Detective Kilcoyne said he expected the number to reach 1,000 by the end of the day. Some callers thought they recognized family members, while others feared the worst. Police confirmed that about 5 of the women had been tentatively identified, but they would not say whether they were alive. For the families of missing women, the photo gallery was both a beacon of hope and a source of renewed grief. After Franklin's arrest, relatives of 4 missing women had already approached the authorities, convinced their loved ones might have been among his victims. There was also 28-year-old Inez Warren, who had been shot and killed in 1998. Investigators were now re-examining her case, wondering if Franklin's hand had reached that far back. Franklin's history painted the portrait of a man hiding in plain sight, a retired car mechanic. He lived quietly in South Los Angeles, blending into a neighborhood that had seen decades of hardship. Police now believe he might also have been the notorious South Side Slayer, a serial killer who terrorized the city in the 1980s. His later nickname, the Grim Sleeper, came from what appeared to be a 14-year gap between his murder sprees, from 1988 to 2002. Yet, even that gap raised questions. Had the killings truly stopped, Or had Franklin simply gotten better at hiding them? Between 1985 and 1988, and again between 2002 and 2007, women were found shot, strangled, or dumped in alleys and abandoned lots. Many of them were vulnerable: sex workers, women struggling with addiction, or those living on the margins of society. They were easy to overlook, and that made them easy targets. When police finally connected Franklin to the murders, it was through a twist of forensic science. DNA evidence linked him to several crime scenes. Investigators had been unable to find a direct match in their database until they tested DNA from Franklin's son during an unrelated case. That partial match led them straight to Lonnie Franklin. Police Chief Charlie Beck admitted that even with Franklin behind bars, they were far from understanding the full scope of his crimes. "We certainly do not believe that we are so lucky or so good as to know all of his victims," he said. "We need the public's help." As the investigation deepened, the city of Los Angeles watched in disbelief. The idea that one man could hide such horror behind the walls of an ordinary home was almost too much to comprehend. The photographs, once just images on film, had become silent witnesses, each face telling a story that demanded to be heard. Detectives continued to sift through the evidence, hoping that with time, names would replace numbers, and faces would no longer remain unknown. For the families still searching for answers, the release of those photographs was both a nightmare and a lifeline. Somewhere among those 160 faces lay the key to long-forgotten disappearances, unsolved murders, and the truth about one of the most haunting chapters in Los Angeles' history. On July 6, 2016, a routine traffic stop turned into a nightmare that was captured from every angle. The dashcam video and the live footage that followed stripped the distance from the moment and left viewers with nothing to hide behind. A woman's voice cuts through the chaos, raw and impossible to steady, pleading through the radio static and the shouted commands as officers move around the car with guns drawn. What began as a pullover for a busted taillight becomes the scene of a fatal shooting, and the simple, ordinary act of reaching for identification becomes the line between life and death. The passenger's voice is frantic, urgent, and full of disbelief. She keeps telling them not to move. She keeps telling the officers that he is licensed to carry, that he is reaching for his wallet and his license. She says it over and over, trying to layer facts over the crackle of adrenaline, hoping the repetition will cut through the fear. "Don't move. We got pulled over. He is licensed to carry. He was reaching for his wallet and his ID." Those are ordinary sentences, the kind you say every day, until someone fires a gun and every ordinary sentence snaps like glass. You hear the officer shout, and then the sound of bullets. Her voice changes from instruction to heartbreaking alarm. "He has been shot." She screams to get the baby out, push the child away from the collapsing adult body. There is no time to calculate the sequence. There is only the immediate, visceral need to protect the child, to name the wound, to speak into the void so that someone else can act with clarity. "He is shot in the arm," she says. The word arm, a small and terrible measure against the fact of blood and falling. The woman begs the officers not to tell her he is dead. "Please do not tell me my boyfriend just went like that. Please do not tell me he is gone." The pleading is a litany of disbelief, an effort to stave off the worst meaning of what has happened. In between her cries, instructions are barked at them by police. "Exit now. Keep your hands up. Let me see your hands." The clash of commands and pleas creates a violent choreography where no one can guess the next move. It is hard not to notice the human details amid the chaos. She calls him baby. She asks where her daughter is. The urgency is not only for her partner but for the child in the back seat, a presence that transforms a private tragedy into a public emergency. Amid the shouted orders and the groans of pain, she continues to explain. "He was reaching for his license," she says. "I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his ID and his driver's license." These sentences, ordinary enough in any traffic encounter, become testimony, fragments of a life that is being recorded in real time. As the scene unfolds, the camera does not spare the viewer. It captures the split seconds where judgment is made and actions are taken. The officer's voice is firm, clipped. "Get the female passenger out. Keep your hands up. Exit now." Procedural words. They are used to control a scene that has already spiraled beyond control. The woman complies and continues to plead, to grieve aloud, to narrate the small factual details in the hope that clarity might coax mercy or explanation from those standing over the wounded man. There is an unbearable sequence of shock, accusation, and raw grief. You can hear the woman counting the shots. You can hear her say he was shot 4 times. She tells them again that he was only getting his license and registration. The number of bullets becomes another part of the litany, a grim arithmetic the mind cannot accept. 4 shots, she says, as if naming the precise tally will anchor the reality, will allow someone to trace what led to those 4 terrible impacts. What the dashcam captures is more than a sequence of commands and responses. It captures the humanity of a moment that ends in violence. The woman's voice is the thread that runs through it, a human anchor trying to hold together the raw pieces. She alternates between instruction and prayer, between fierce protection of the child and a search for answers. "Please, Lord Jesus, do not tell me this," she cries. Then, "Please do not tell me he is gone." Those words are ordinary prayers turned into desperate refrains. When the officers move to secure the scene, when more commands are given, the woman's questions become sharper, directed. "Where is my daughter?" she asks. "You got my daughter." The practicalities of protecting a child intrude into the immediate horror, reminding us that the consequences of that moment will ripple far beyond the 2 people in the front seat. A family has been shattered, and a small child has witnessed something she may never forget. The footage forces the viewer into a jury of one. It allows no comfortable distance. You watch the gestures, the reach, the exchange of words, the split second that becomes irreversible. You are left with the image of a young man, reaching for his wallet and his identification, a small and ordinary act, and then the sound of gunfire and the body collapsing. You are left with the arc of a woman's voice, moving from instruction to pleading, to prayer, to accusation, a stream of sound that attempts to make meaning of what she has seen. By the time the scene ends, the camera has recorded more than an incident. It has recorded a cascade of consequences, from the immediate physical harm to the emotional shock, to the legal and civic questions that would follow. The raw footage does not answer those questions. It merely shows us what happened, and in doing so, it demands that we watch, that we listen, and that we reckon with the life that was so quickly and tragically taken. And that brings us to the end of this episode. If you found this video informative, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what we drop next. We cover stories like this almost every day, and trust me, you don't want to be left behind. If you can't wait until the next upload, there are more videos popping up on your screen in just a few seconds. Click one and keep watching. Until then, take care. I'm out.